So I want to welcome everybody to this morning's session, which is our 5th practice sharing session, I think. My name is Anna Muller. I am the chair of the Neurological Alliance of Scotland, which is a coalition of 54 third sector organisations which have an interest in supporting people with neurological conditions in Scotland. I'm also a member of the National Advisory Committee for neurological conditions, which is implementing the neurological, or overseeing the implementation of the Neurological Framework for Scottish Government. I'd really like to thank the organisers, which would be Alice Struthers and Lorna McGee from the Neurological Alliance of Scotland, and Ewan Bailey and colleagues from Scottish Government who've really pulled this event together. So they'll be making sure it runs smoothly, hopefully keeping me to time. And my main role, I think, is to make sure that we get through a really packed programme in time for everybody to finish up at 1 o'clock. We really appreciate how tight everybody is for time. So this is designed to be a very, very brisk meeting. Just to say that if you have comments in the Q&A session, please do raise your hand using the tool if you can, because that means that we'll definitely be able to see you, because there are too many of us to all fit on one of my screens. So so that's really it from me as an introduction. I want to welcome Stephanie McNerney from the Centre for Sustainable Delivery, who has 10 minutes, which we'll be timing, to talk about the Improving Patient Pathways project, which they've been undertaking under the framework. Thanks, Stephanie.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide an update from CFSD this morning. My name is Stephanie McNerney. I'm a National Improvement Advisor. I've been in post for about 4 months now in this team, so really starting to get a feel for the priorities, the neurology specialty work stream, the specialty delivery group, and what we need to prioritise for the coming year. If we could get the next slide, please, Ewan. Thank you. So CFSD, what's its function, what's its vision? It's around shared learning, around collaboration, around understanding and picking up the bits of best practice and the really good work that happens in little pockets, and sharing that knowledge and insight. And there are challenges, but how do we try and overcome them, and how do we adapt those processes and pathways to local context and circumstance, and minimise variation where it's unhelpful, while taking that local solutions to local problems approach. Next slide, please. So this is a very quick overview of the objectives of CFSD and where we should be prioritising our main focus. As I say, for me, neurology is one of my specialties, and the mechanism that we have for taking forward this work is the specialty delivery group. We've got 14, I think, in CFSD, and neurology is one of the ones I support. Next slide, please. So we have 5 kind of pillars, if you like, in the scope of our SDGs. Processes is around things like ACRT and PIR. Pathways, the group, it's a collaborative group of specialists from across the country, and people who really know their stuff, and they know what the challenges are, and they know where the areas of focus and priority should be. So that group informs what our priority should be in terms of pathways that we need to maybe develop or standardise or refine or whatever for each year. We've also got cross-cutting workforce and innovation topics which may come up that may affect some of or all of to some extent or other, so we can create subgroups or things like that to take forward specific pilots or tests of change around different models of skill mix of workforce or different technology or innovation options. Next slide, please. So one of those processes is ACRT, active clinical referral triage. So it's essentially an enhanced vetting. So some of you may well be familiar with this, but it gives us a number, a kind of range of outcomes from that vetting process, which broadens out our options a little bit, so we can potentially at an early stage identify that someone might need diagnostics, and we can then put in a request or a referral for the person to go and get the diagnostics undertaken, so that then they're not turning up to a hospital appointment and then having that discussion. Then we realise that they need diagnostics, then they go away again, then they've got to come back, and it makes it just a much more efficient process in terms of utilisation of resource, but it makes it a better experience for patients as well. None of us want to be tripping up to the hospital to different appointments a number of different times. We can also share information, whether that's leaflets or other resources, to kind of give, again, at an early stage, some of the advice, the information, the context and options that people might be given at that first appointment. It just brings that forward a little bit in the process. But then they can also be referred on to waiting lists or face-to-face or video consultations. So most, I think, many health boards across the country will have ACRT in some shape or form at the moment. We have literally just gone out with a little short self-assessment on ACRT and PIR, just to ask boards how they're getting along with things, if there's any kind of additional support that they might be looking for, what some of their challenges might be, and we'll pull all of that together, hopefully by the end of this month, and pull out any kind of themes and pick that up for discussion at that SDG, that Specialty Delivery Group. We have further information available on ACRT and PIR on TURAS, and I think the links to that's going to be shared after the meeting. Next slide, please. So PIR, again, patient-initiated review. I think there are fewer health boards using PIR. I think that's fair to say. I think it's just in part due to headspace and just an ability to sit down and think, how do we maybe plan and manage our pathways and processes a little bit differently. So again, that's included within the self-assessment that we've gone out with, and this is one of the things that we'll be looking to support health boards with if it's something that they would like to take on in this coming planning year. Lanarkshire have been a little bit further down the road with PIR, so there, I think, I don't know, maybe six or 7 months, I think, into that, and we want to kind of learn from what they've had, and take any learning and expand that a little bit. Next slide, please. So SDGs for the coming year, we have been asked to set out an annual work plan, a draft work plan of the proposed topic areas that we would like the group to take on and develop and deliver over this coming fiscal year. We have literally just sent out the meeting dates for the year and an overview of what those priority areas should be. The self-assessment, as I've mentioned, we've sent a link out for that, so that should be kind of coming back over the next couple of weeks, and we'll pull all of that together and produce a collated summary out of that. We do need to kind of understand impact a little better. So if we're doing ACRT, what does that mean for our teams? What does that mean for our patients? Can we demonstrate that it's actually having a positive impact? So things like that, we need to kind of measurement mechanisms we need to work on a little bit over the coming year. We have in CFSD heat map meetings. I don't know if any of you have been involved in those, where the kind of leads from each of the health boards will meet with some of the management team from my team, and it's a self-assessment thing as well. So it's really how you're getting along. Set yourself a little bit stretch, but kind of realistic targets of where you would want to get to, and how you kind of go against that over the course of the year. So those, I think, are monthly, and that's one of the ways that we're measuring our impact. So we have GP fact sheets, which I'll come on to in a minute. We're also looking in terms of pathways for the coming year to prioritise the headache pathway. We have a draft pathway for headache. It's quite a large document, so we're having a bit of a rethink about how best to present that information in a way that's going to be accessible, in a way that is not going to feel overwhelming. If you're looking for information, you don't necessarily want to dig through a big document. So we're trying to pull that together in almost a kind of package, a suite of complementary information documents, with the pathway being the headline to that, and pulling it all together. We're also looking to hopefully pick up functional neurological disorders as part of the pathway planning for this year. That will be, for obvious reasons, quite complex. Big thumbs up. Yeah. So you know, I think we're at the very beginning. We've a lot of work to do to pull that together, but I think it has a potential to be quite high impact, that one. So yeah, it's on the radar, it's on the work plan, and what we have done is ask SDG members to flag up to us if there are any other areas, and we'll discuss that at our next meeting, which is the 29th of March. So we can have.
So Stephanie, just to highlight why I'm going thumbs up, because I'm the FND Hope rep, and yes. I have FND myself, so I know I know a little bit about what goes on.
Brilliant, super. We can have a discussion about it. Perfect, thank you very much. So that's a quick trot through of what the priority areas are for this coming year. And if we just go into the next slide, please. When I was talking about the GP fact sheets, so we have situations where GPs might refer into neurology, and then for whatever reason that referral isn't accepted, and it's really around having a resource for some of the almost frequently asked questions around things like pathways, medications, that kind of thing, self-management. And these are the 10 GP fact sheets that have been developed. We are tweaking final tweaks with our comms just to get them correct and presentable in a professional format, and those will be made available hopefully over the next couple of weeks. I know I've maybe said that before to some of you, but we're perilously close to getting these information sheets out, and hopefully that will be a good resource. It'll inform primarily GPs, but there's nothing in there that couldn't be shared with patients as well, and it should minimise that kind of ineffective use of time, let's say, for having referrals and then back into GPs. So those are the priority areas. We're also thinking about one for pharmacy and one for patient as well, a kind of high level information sheet. And that is me, and I hope I've stuck to time. Thanks very much, everyone. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Stephanie. We're going to have a Q&A session after the next two speakers, so please do keep your questions for Stephanie until then. Thank you. I've got a wee timer here that goes off, so I don't know whether you heard my beeps. So that told you that you were more or less bang on. Thank you very much for delivering so much information in so short a time. Our next speaker in what I have called the occupational therapy section is Leslie Scobie from NHS Lanarkshire, who is an occupational therapist by background. And yes, Leslie, I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll set my timer now.
Okay, the pressure's on. I'm going to talk to you about development and evaluation of a goal setting and action planning GAP for short online training resource. And it was a big project team, a couple of clinical academics, some frontline NHS Lanarkshire staff, and a PhD researcher. Next slide, please. So that's really what we were all asked to deliver on today, so we don't really need to spend much time on that, but that's what I'll chat through. Next slide, please. So what is the GAP framework? Well, it really is a framework to guide rehabilitation clinical practice in relation to trying to help support people think about where they're at and where do they want to get to, what's the steps along the way, how do we manage when things are going well, and how do we manage when things aren't going so well. So that's really essentially what the GAP framework's designed to do. It's for use by multidisciplinary teams delivering community rehabilitation to people with neurological conditions. Next slide, please. So what did we do in this project? Well, what we really wanted to do was to develop a GAP online training resource. And in that stage, we developed training content, we developed training videos, and we uploaded additional resources, for example, records that people with neurological conditions could write down in an accessible way what their goals were, what their plans were, and to review how they were getting on. What we then did is that we delivered the training to 3 teams within NHS Lanarkshire, and we also delivered 2 complementary webinars. And then we evaluated the training using a training questionnaire and a focus group. But this study was embedded within a GCU PhD study, so the impact of the training in terms of implementation is being evaluated within that study, and we'll report on that next year. Just to mention that we had an advisory group which consisted of folk with neurological conditions and rehab staff to help us through our project and its delivery. Next slide, please. So we came at this is a screenshot of the front page of our GAP online training resource. You'll see up at the top what the various sections are. So there's a home page, if you could click through, Ewan. There's a home page, there's a section about GAP next, and then there's a whole section on GAP training and what the stages of GAP are. There's a section on rights barriers and ramps, and that's really about people who have cognitive and/or communication difficulties and how we help them access the process. We have a whole section on implementation, and that is, okay, as a team, how do we make this work in our local setting? And then finally, there's a section where staff can download resources for use and practice. Next slide, please. So what's our achievements to date? Well, we've developed it, so that's good. We included people with neurological conditions in developing the content of the training, and that was really important for us. We've included training videos to illustrate clinical scenarios, and we felt that was really important to give viewers a feel for this is how this might play itself out in practice. And it's hosted on the World Wide Web, so potentially available to everyone. This is just one slide in terms to talk about the evaluation, but we asked people about their overall training ratings, and you'll see that the vast majority said that the training, both the online training resource and webinars, were either excellent or good. So we were really pleased with that as a ballpark in terms of how the training went down within the 3 teams. Next slide, please. So what were the challenges? Well, having NHS frontline staff, I think, was critical to this project, but it did take a bit of time to backfill and make that work, but it was definitely worth the effort. We were shooting videos in the COVID pandemic. I'll not go into the detail, but that was challenging. And whenever you develop a resource, an online resource, you have to think about how we're going to host it, how we're going to fund the hosting, and updates in the longer term. In terms of a learning point, for me, it was this unique perspective of people with lived experience in neurological conditions, and we actually included a whole section in the training in supportive language and hope, and that was directly related to their input. Next bit. So what's next? We're doing a wee bit of tweaking of the training based on feedback, and that's happening as we speak. I'm in the process of disseminating information about the training resource, and my background is stroke, so I kind of know where to go for that, but disseminating it to people, to teams or people that would benefit in other neurological conditions and brain injury would be helpful. We need to capture the impact of this training. And I'm turning my attention to that. We're working on an academic paper to describe this work, and we need to think about how the webinars would work, because they were an adjunct to the training and are not part of the online resource. Next slide, please. this is where people can find out more, and very happy to field questions via email or online. So thanks so much for that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm desperately trying to unmute myself. Thank you, Leslie, for keeping to time. I'm sure people will have questions on that in the section or later. Our next speaker is Dr. Jenny Preston from NHS Ayrshire and Arran, who's talking about a joint project around transition for people with neurological conditions. So, Jenny, that's you.
Thank you very much, Tanith and Ewan, and good morning, everybody. I'm Jenny Preston, and as we say, in my day job, I am a consultant occupational therapist within NHS Ayrshire and Arran. And the work that I'm going to share with you today is part of a much wider collaboration. And while I have the great honour to be presenting it today, I do wish to gratefully acknowledge the extensive contributions of my colleagues Stephanie Fraser, Rebecca Williams, Dr. Jane Green, Professor Divya Jindal-Snape, and the comic artists. Our group were incredibly fortunate to receive funding in both the first two rounds. Next slide, please, Ewan. So what did we do? Neurological Care and Support in Scotland, the Framework for Action, acknowledges that people with neurological conditions experience difficulty during times of transition. Fundamental to this work was the establishment of a preferred definition of transitions, which we believe could be adopted by Scottish Government as part of the implementation of the framework. So, transitions, according to the work that we've done, can be defined as an ongoing process of psychological, social, and educational adaptations due to changes in context, interpersonal relationships, and/or identity, which can be simultaneously exciting and worrying for an individual and others in their lives, and which can require ongoing additional support. This programme of work incorporated 3 key stages of inquiry and was undertaken in collaboration with Cerebral Palsy Scotland, the Scottish Transitions Forum through ARC Scotland, University of Dundee, and NHS Ayrshire and Arran's Neurological Rehabilitation Service. So building on the existing Principles of Good Transitions 3 published in 2019, this provided a collaborative space for organisations to contribute a range of knowledge, experience and perspectives to identify areas for improvement and inform future design processes. We undertook a comprehensive review of the current literature, which was intended to evaluate the effectiveness of interventions used to support transitions across the lifespan for people living with neurological conditions. The review identified a number of gaps in the published evidence base, for example, a lack of outcome measurement, a lack of outcome data evaluating the effectiveness of transition, short follow-up data collection periods with a mean follow-up of 7.5 months, which meant the long-term impact of transition interventions remains unknown, and a paucity of experiential evidence from individuals, families and caregivers about the impact of transition. In addition, one of the key findings was the lack of evidence related to transition of those who develop a neurological condition as an adult. Next slide, please, Ewan. In the third stage of the project, semi-structured interviews were undertaken with people living with a neurological condition to explore and develop an understanding of the impact of their life transitions. So findings from 7 people through qualitative interviews indicated that transition is associated with a range of negative emotions, including fear, sadness, humiliation, loss, and vulnerability. Barriers to successful transition include the lack of holistic approaches, assumptions, lack of choice, and a lack of access. Consequently, people living with a neurological condition feel disempowered, a lack of compassion and empathy, and a lack of understanding. Enablers to successful transition include flexible and adaptable approaches to care and support, personalised planning and involvement in key decisions about their care, and including technology-enabled solutions where appropriate. Next slide, please. Our group therefore believe that development of a neurology-specific set of principles, incorporating illness experience, developmental and lifespan transitions, and social and cultural transitions, embedded within a good practice framework, could be applicable to people living with neurological conditions across all aspects of transition. This could have significant and far-reaching consequences for people living with a neurological condition while facilitating working with key partners across sectors. The development of generic pan-neurological principles of good transition across the lifespan will enable better coordination of services that can address the complete medical, psychosocial, emotional and vocational needs of people with complex lifelong neurological conditions, and enable the delivery of personalised care that is rights-based and takes account of people's experiences and choices. Next slide, please, Ewan. So where can you find more? Dissemination of our work has been a key focus for the project team, and I'm delighted to share some examples of the creative approaches that we use through our comics today. This slide contains information where you can find out more information about the project or to access the cartoons in full. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and you've beaten the timer. Yes, thanks everybody for those excellent presentations. Just to draw people's attention to the fact that Alice has been putting some of those links from all of the presentations down in the chat. So if you haven't checked out the chat, there are links in there that you can go through as live, as well as them being on the slides. So thanks very much to everybody for their questions. We've got a 10-minute slot now for questions and answers. So has anybody got any questions for our presenters this morning? Right, so that's I've got one from Steve to start us off. Steve, I can't hear you. I don't know whether you're still on mute.
No, I've now unmuted myself. I was just struggling because I'm not that familiar with MS Teams. It was a question for Jenny. I was very, very impressed with what you had to say. And also, I would say I've had excellent OT support for my FND. But would you say that this is possibly generating a set of neurologically specific trained OTs? Because quite a few OTs out in the community are very generalist.
Thank you. Thank you for your very positive feedback, Steve. I mean, it's been a really interesting piece of work that we've been doing, and to summarise it in 4 minutes or 5 minutes is really challenging, particularly for me, because those of you who know me well know that I like to chat. So, so this wasn't specific to occupational therapy, although I am obviously an occupational therapist, but this was about looking at transition across the whole range, across life, because we do understand that perhaps previously the focus has been predominantly on young people transitioning from education and also from child health services into adult health services. So we were really keen to look at transition across life, not just specific to young people, but incorporating young people as well. And we know, and the evidence confirms, that there's very little evidence around the impact of transition when people are diagnosed with a neurological condition in adulthood as well. So there's a whole range of different transitions. I think from an occupational therapy perspective, and extremely biased here, I think occupational therapy has a potential role to support in transition. And I would certainly advocate in that. And in association with another piece of work that I'm involved in, then hopefully we're about to publish some work soon in terms of a transition programme that I've been supporting locally, but that's not associated with this piece of work. So yes, I'm incredibly biased and think occupational therapists can contribute to this role. Wholeheartedly agree that we need more occupational therapists who are informed and feel that they have the specialist skills in relation to neurological practice, but that's a massive step away. So anything that we can all do to support that, then I would absolutely welcome that. However, in fairness, it's not specific to occupational therapy, and I think there are other people. And it's quite interesting because in one of the interviews, somebody identified a role for what they were calling a disability coordinator, which I thought was quite interesting. So it wasn't discipline or profession specific, but it was still this concept of somebody case managing or coordinating somebody's care. I think the risk of it being occupational therapy specific is it's more likely to sit within health. And I'm not sure that that's the right thing, because we're not just talking about conditions here, we're talking about supporting people with a whole range of different aspects of their life. So yeah, much scope for discussion and debate there, but I'm glad that you found it helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I'm biased exactly like you. I think occupational therapy has a very big role in transitions.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just to say, you know, it is that multidisciplinary approach as well. So, you know, enabling people to flex and give the support that people need, I think. I had 3 questions. I seem to have now gone on to 2, possibly reflecting the amount of time we've got. So in the order that they're appearing on my screen, Ewan, you've got a question.
Well, 2 if I can get them in the sustainable delivery. Sorry, yes. The groups seem to appear to require specialists with established knowledge. Is there a policy for developing specialist knowledge where none currently exists? And the other one is in the referral triage, where government policy is rather to discourage unnecessary referrals. Is there a policy for using speculative referrals for knowledge development? Thank you.
Thank you for that. As it stands, the membership of the SDG, the Specialty Delivery Group, does tend to lean on people with the expertise to bring in. I think the group's only met a couple of times before, so it's very much a kind of forming and refining as we go situation. I think there's definitely a place for that. I think we would be looking to have a clinician, a nursery HP as appropriate. We're certainly leaving that to the health board to kind of decide in teams who is the most appropriate person that they would like to represent and attend and feed back to their health board. So at the moment, no, the short answer is no, we don't have that in place at the moment. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be the case, or why we couldn't have some kind of shadowing or that type of thing in due course. We, as I say, we're learning as we go. We're still quite early into the process of establishing that group. The second question, in terms of speculative referrals for the purposes of learning, again, no, we don't have that at the moment. We are very much trying to really refine our processes and our pathways and try and just get that running as slick as we can. At the moment, we've got some challenging circumstances which all health boards and all teams are operating within, as you'll well know. I think it may be something that we could get to. There's certainly a scope and a role for the group in learning and shared learning and advancement. So definitely a role for that in future maybe, but we don't have that at the moment. Don't know how that answers your question.
Yep.
Thanks, Ewan. Right, I've got Stuart Stephen who's got a question, and then Mary. I'm just reminded that my time is going to go off in 3 minutes, so please try and keep them brief.
Okay, thanks, Tanith. Hi, it's Stuart Stevens. So I'm on secondment to the chronic pain team from NHS Grampian. I was just interested what Stephanie had to say about patient-initiated reviews. So I was operational manager at NHS Grampian. One of the specialties was rheumatology, and about 1.5 years ago, we started doing we call patient-triggered reviews, which I think is essentially the same thing. And the approach then was there was about 2,000 patients waiting on the return list. And we started by writing out to about 100 patients at a time, in case we got a whole deluge of patients who, required appointments. But it was quite surprising, the results. I just wondered what approach you took with that, Stephanie.
We haven't been prescriptive in that, because numbers are going to vary by health board, by condition coming through the specialty. So we've really left that fairly flexible to the teams to establish and develop a way that's going to work for them. Absolutely, but I think the first thing to say would be that PIR isn't going to be suitable for all patients or for all conditions necessarily. So that's a call that needs to be taken by an appropriate person within the team with the knowledge of the condition and of the patient in the list. One of the things that has come up in conversations around PIR has been around that potential for large numbers to come back in. It doesn't, anecdotally, it doesn't seem to have been the case so far. However, we have in the back of our mind that is a potential. It's definitely something that we would need to build into our SOP. We have a template for an SOP, but again, leaving that flexibility for local circumstance. It would be something that we would ask and encourage the teams to consider at an early stage around how they would manage that within knowing their list size, knowing their patients, knowing the circumstances that they're operating within. But we certainly need to think about measuring and having clearer data that demonstrates to us what those return numbers and what the kind of staggered nature or pattern of the returns looks like. We don't have that at the moment. It is very anecdotal, so something that kind of data gathering measurement mechanism will help us understand a wee bit better. Anecdotally, it doesn't seem to be a big problem for us at the moment, but maybe the more we do it, we might see more of it. It's hard to tell at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks. Mary, I'm noting that you've got a question. My alarm's gone off. Would it be all right for you to ask the question and perhaps for the person it's addressed to reply in the chat?
Yes.
Okay. You've muted yourself, Mary.
It's a question for Stephanie. Would it be possible for all future nurses and doctors to be trained in certain aspects of neurological conditions? I myself have essential tremor, and I was in hospital a couple of years ago, and neither the doctor or the nursing staff had ever heard of essential tremor. So I spent the first hour of being in hospital explaining to them what essential tremor was. Is there any future training for nurses and doctors in neurological conditions?
Thanks, Mary. I'll drop you a little response in the chat box.
That's absolutely great. Thank you. I can also see that there's a question that's been asked in the chat, which I've managed to lose, actually. Sorry about that. I'm not very good on Teams, so I've now managed to lose everybody, which is not ideal. Right, so moving on, thanks very much to everybody for that. Our next speaker in a block of 3 is Ruth Richardson, who works for Action for ME, and this is a coalition project. So over to you, Ruth, to tell us all about it.
Thanks very much, and hi everyone. Thanks for those presentations this morning. We have loaded these slides given that there's a very short amount of time to tell you about the project, so please do look at them afterwards. But as mentioned, I'm Ruth. I'm the Director of Development at Action for ME, and this is a partnership project that we've been running since 2020, the first round of funding, and our continuation funding ends in September this year. And the partnership is to inform health and social care professionals about ME, known as myalgic encephalomyelitis, or sometimes chronic fatigue syndrome. It's a long-term fluctuating neurological condition. The symptoms affect many bodily systems, more commonly the nervous and immune systems. It affects an estimated 20,000 adults and children in Scotland, although that number could be far higher, as unfortunately the research around this condition isn't as robust as with others. It's a misunderstood condition and, as a consequence, often underdiagnosed, and people don't get the support that they need to manage their symptoms and life. And as a result, have a much lower, research shows, have a much lower quality of life than other people with different long-term conditions. So our project brought together 4 charities working in Scotland, along with health professionals, to address this gap in medical education around the condition. Next slide, please, Ewan. A large part of the project has been promoting a CPD module on ME CFS, worth one point, that had already been created by Dr. Nina Muirhead. She's a dermatologist who has ME herself. We've recently updated it, and I'll talk about that in a moment in terms of the NICE guideline. But alongside the module, we've also been developing supporting podcasts. We have 8 at the moment on different topics, including nursing, physiotherapy, long COVID, given the overlapping symptoms between ME and long COVID, medical education in universities, social care, and the new NICE guidance. The podcasts themselves always feature healthcare professionals, but also the patient voice. It's really important for us and our project that we make sure that the real experiences of people with ME are put to the forefront, and it always leads to some very rich discussion between the healthcare professionals and patients around this condition. In addition to podcasts and the CPD, we ran a webinar on social care, which was attended by a number of social workers. We've been submitting posters to conferences. We've been in touch with community links workers, and we also developed a letter that patients could use to send to their GP to encourage them to take the module. Next slide, please. We've put some feedback and outcomes on this slide so that you can see how the module is impacting medical education and confidence around this condition. We're really pleased that we've doubled our target of people accessing the module. We had a target of 500 health and social care professionals in Scotland to do it, and we've now reached over 1,000 people at our last count. The platform that hosts the module is called Learner, and we commissioned them to carry out an assessment survey of people that had taken the module, not just in Scotland, but all over the world, but we have been able to refine the results to Scotland as well. Campaign reached over 1,500 people, and we were really pleased to get the feedback that over 70% of the people who access the module would feel more confident in diagnosing and managing the symptoms of ME with their patients. And tellingly, nearly 100% thought that there's not enough formal education in this area, which is what our project set out to address, at least in part. The top quote on that slide there is from one of the guests that we had on our podcast, and we hear very, very regularly from patients that if their healthcare professional had had access to a resource like this, it would have vastly improved the support that they received in managing their condition and potentially improving their outcomes as well. So we're very, very keen for people to undertake this module. It takes less than an hour. And next slide, please, Ewan. So we updated the module last year and then launched it again this month. This was updated in line with the new NICE guidance on ME CFS that was released in October 2021. In the first few weeks, it's had over 500 downloads, so great to see that there's such interest in this. And it uses updated research and understanding around ME since the module was first produced. We're now working to set up a medical student reference group in the last part of the project so that we can do a bit more of a deep dive into understanding how medical students have reacted to using this module, how it's helped their understanding and study, and also what else might be useful going forwards in terms of education. For us, it's really key to be engaging with people at the start of their medical careers so that we can try and change some of the previously held stigma and assumptions about this condition. We have further promotion plans and new podcasts, but one of our challenges has been engaging with the statutory agencies, so the Royal Colleges and NHS Education Scotland, who could have really helped us to push this module out. So we'll be pushing in that direction again. Last slide, Ewan, and I won't take more than 10 seconds for this one. Here you can find out more about our project. You can also access the module, and we've included a link to the podcasts, which are available on Buzzsprout, and also the updated NICE guideline. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Moving next to Helen McLean talking about NHS Lanarkshire and Lanarkshire's work on acquired brain injury.
Thank you, Tanith, and thank you to everyone for coming and listening today, and I'll try my best to stick to time. So yes, the project that I'm speaking about is about the development that we've done of launching NHS Lanarkshire's first LearnPro module on acquired brain injury. So LearnPro is the kind of NHS platform for CPD modules, and NHS Lanarkshire hasn't had one on brain injury, so this was to develop one. Next slide, please. So this kind of came about because what we were finding is staff in acute sites across Lanarkshire have some information about brain injury, but certainly it's not consistent, and that was being reflected in the terms of the information that us as a community team following these patients up, the quality of that information, and sometimes the misinformation that people were being given. So what we did was we started with thinking, what does this content need to be? What do staff need to know? What do we want everyone to know? We wanted it to be something that all staff could access and participate, from admin, porters, nursing staff, medical staff, allied health professions. So there was a group of us that put together the content, and we've covered things like brain anatomy, the effects of brain injury, different types, and some of the basics around rehabilitation and the different people that might be involved in that. We then took that first draft, so to speak, and piloted it with a cross-section of staff, including admin, support staff, AHPs and nursing, and we took that feedback from them and from other people in our team that hadn't seen the initial draft, made some changes, and then to get it actually out there onto the platform, the LearnPro platform, that involved liaising with organisational development within NHS Lanarkshire, because they're the ones that can put it together onto something called Lab Advanced, which is the platform used to deliver LearnPro modules. And there was also, as I'm sure all of us in NHS are aware, lots of other processes to follow in terms of putting in learning proposals and completing an equality and diversity impact assessment. So there was a few things that went on other than just putting together the content. Next slide, please. In terms of what we're hoping will be the benefits of this, is that really everyone can have access to increase their knowledge of brain injury, no matter what staff grade or background you come from. And the aim with this is that staff can have more confidence at treating people who are perhaps in the acute stages of recovering from a brain injury, but also if staff perhaps encounter people who are patients readmitted. Might be something to do with their brain injury, it might not be, but just to have access to more information. And what we as a community team hope is that that will improve patient management. Patients will be given better information at an earlier stage in different forms that will be helpful for them. And that means that the information we get as a community team will help us in terms of prioritising patients, that we get the right information at the right time, and we're not having to delay seeing someone while we're chasing up other bits of information. So lots of big hopes for this. This is a LearnPro module, and so in terms of seeing how well that works, it'll be a case of seeing how many people are completing this module via the LearnPro system, and also if that information is being absorbed, we have a quick 10-question assessment that happens at the end. So this has just gone live finally in the last couple of weeks, so it's still very early days to see if this is going to make the difference. We're not at that stage yet of knowing if these benefits have actually happened. And the next slide. In terms of where we want to go, we have big ideas, of course. This is just an introduction to acquired brain injury module, and there's things mentioned within it that could be really beneficial to go into in modules in and of themselves. For example, post-traumatic amnesia, we find in the nurses and medics get very little training on this, and particularly in Lanarkshire, patients at the early stages of brain injury are not necessarily in a neurological ward, so staff don't have this understanding. We would also like to focus on some other areas such as executive function and dysfunction. Changes to communication are relevant to brain injury, particularly cognitive communication changes. prolonged disorders of consciousness. And we're also hoping that we can expand this beyond NHS Lanarkshire via perhaps the TURA system and also with Sabin. And the next slide is my last slide, which is just to say, you know, I'm happy to be contacted, and we're just in the process of getting this put on, our final report put on the public website, so NHS members of the public can access it. Thank you. Slightly over time.
Thanks very much, Helen. We are running about 5 minutes over time, which might have some impact on our facilitated discussion section a bit later. But for now, over to Fiona from the Institute of Neurosciences in Glasgow to talk about the Advanced Practitioner project that they've been working on.
Thanks, Tanith. So yes, I'm Fiona. I'm one of the physios over at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and the Neuro Institute. The aim of our project was to scope the role of an advanced practitioner physiotherapist within the Regional Neurosciences Centre here. We focused on movement disorders, specifically Parkinson's. We wanted to establish a model of care, and that model would provide a foundation for a wider application of this model to other chronic neurological conditions. In terms of advanced practitioners, advanced practice is defined as synthesizing knowledge and skills to support comprehensive clinical reasoning to manage patients, often with complex, recurring, challenging, unusual presentations. They are expert and autonomous in their field. So what we did, first of all, we looked at the evidence for this advanced practitioner role, and that evidence there to say that they can adopt the work that's traditionally medically led by the consultants, so easing the workload of the consultants that we know are stretched whilst being cost effective and reduce waiting times. We looked at the evidence that currently the roles of advanced practitioners within neurosurgery we've got here, so looked at the evidence they have. We also evidenced the role of an integrated care model, which aims for the services to be proactive and timely, as well as holistic and specialist. And we looked at the evidence within Parkinson's itself, so the evidence that people should be referred at the point of diagnosis to specialist physiotherapy, and again kind of promoting that proactive care and self-management. We looked at our current service provision, looking at the service users as well as the service providers. 100% of clinicians that we surveyed agreed that access to physiotherapy was not responsive enough to meet patients' changing needs. There was no specialist service for physiotherapy within Parkinson's, and access that they did have to physio was lengthy. With some areas of Glasgow, you're waiting 20 to 30 weeks. Access to physio is quite often reactive, with people not being referred early, again, as opposed to proactive. We also benchmarked against other services kind of locally within elderly services within Parkinson's, as well as more nationally with our colleagues in Edinburgh, and against a certified Parkinson's Centre of Excellence down in Derby. And really that benchmarking showed us that Glasgow was really the only service not to offer that specialist intervention from physio point of view, or to provide education sessions for the patients, which obviously is lacking. In terms of audit, we did a few audits. One of the ones that was consultant led, so the consultants for us had a look at their clinic appointments and highlighted which return appointments they felt that could have been successfully managed by an advanced practitioner instead of themselves. We also looked at the frequency of consultant reviews. There was quite a lot of variance between our consultants. Some were 6-month reviews, some were 12-month reviews, and could we look at a kind of more kind of consistent pathway for patients. And last but certainly not least is the patient voice. Kind of surveys and focus groups led us for them to say 84% of the patients that we surveyed felt that the current service didn't meet their needs. 100% of them felt they did have that lack of education and proactive and physiotherapy. 100% of them agreed that they would be on board with a yearly review from the consultant if that meant that they had nurse and physio access in between. And the diagram there just shows the kind of points that were important to them. Next slide, please. So this is a slide just looking at our kind of measurements and benefits. The first kind of graph there, the pie chart there, just highlights that consultant audit that we looked at, and where 21% of the patients that they identified could have been successfully managed by physio. This rose to 28% when looking at other movement disorders, for example, dystonia. The table to the right of that, we also audited, went back and retrospectively looked at the notes of those patients and highlighted that 100% of those patients audited could have benefited not only from being reviewed by physiotherapy, but had a specific physiotherapy intervention at that time, whether it was for safety, provision of aid, specific treatment, but really just demonstrating that missed opportunity to provide that right intervention for the patient at that right time. On the bottom left here is just an example of a kind of single patient study where really it was a patient referred in July. By a few months later, we identified that they could have had a specialist kind of therapy intervention. In this case, it was Botox injections, but we don't provide that in our service in terms of that physio. So they were referred on. We did review them, but they had to be referred on out with our service. And really, it was 7 months after we identified that was likely the treatment that they needed, that they eventually got that. And again, just highlighting how we can improve that patient journey and really the time for accrued disability. I promise I'm nearly finished. Next slide. So we felt we demonstrated the need for this role. Going forward, we have secured funding for a 0.7 physio within movement disorder. They're a wee bit restricted to what service we can provide with just the 0.7 within Parkinson's alone. Within neurology, we've got 600 patients, but what we are doing is working to address the gaps we've identified, highlighting by patients, so that access to physio, the education. We are developing the AP role within a smaller client group just now, though, looking at dystonia and those injections, and obviously the ongoing audit and training and succession planning needed. And the next point is really just evidencing the need for further HP specialists with specific mention to OT, which are kind of severely underrepresented in Glasgow in terms of outpatients. And the last slide is just our contact information if anyone would like to find out more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and a huge thanks to our speakers in this section for keeping it brief. Again, we're having a Q&A session just now, so raise your hands if you'd like to ask a question. I've just seen something from Mary. Can you ask Fiona if she classes essential tremor along similar lines to Parkinson's, as it was hidden behind Parkinson's for many years? So Fiona, do you have a quick answer to that?
I suppose the quick answer is no. We don't really see people with essential tremor. It doesn't come under the Parkinson's kind of guidance here. But I do sometimes see people with essential tremor under DBS and perhaps just in terms of help, again, because we don't have that OT role here, sometimes with help with aids and things like that. But no, not really.
Right, thank you for that. I'm seeing, Ian, that you've got a question, Ian McWhirter.
Thanks, Tanith. Yeah, just a question for Fiona. That was fascinating to see what's been achieved and obviously some tremendous results as well. Just interested in finding out the potential for rolling that out to other conditions such as MS, and also when that is considered, what the possibility of a third sector organisation like Revive, who can support with physiotherapy and exercise, how we could get involved in something like that.
I'm not sure in terms of rolling it out to, again, it comes down to resource, I think, in terms of rolling it out to conditions, in terms of these bigger conditions, and MS is obviously huge numbers within the west of Scotland. I think it does come down to resource and how we do that. We're starting quite small. Like I say, the Parkinson's, even though we highlighted that role, the funding we now have isn't quite big enough to do that role, because you're essentially reviewing these patients, lifelong. Obviously, you're having to review them that regularly. So we're starting kind of smaller with dystonia and trying to roll that out. I suppose that the aim would be after dystonia, we'll maybe hopefully prove the resource needed in terms of Parkinson's, but certainly Revive and things, obviously external kind of third sector groups, I think will be important in links here. Definitely taking these points forward, because again, with the advanced practitioner roles, quite often you're providing that physiotherapy input, but you may not have the scope to follow these patients up. Maybe, as opposed to traditional physio, you might see them every week. So therefore, that might be where that role for yourselves comes into.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. And I see that Ewan, you've got your hand up as well, Ewan Dale.
Yep, just following on from that, you mentioned accessing a national physio approach for Parkinson's, I think, and I was just wondering, are you mapping how many national physio approach resources there are for all these various conditions? I know that we've got one, physios for ME, but that's probably an outlier. But you know, can you map, or can you access somebody else's mapping of all the available approaches that you could introduce? Thanks.
Do you mean what's available in different areas and what pathway they follow in terms of when we benchmark with different services?
Well, you said you're only starting to look at Parkinson's and dystonia, and I'm just wondering where you go to broaden out. You know, have you got a whole lot of targets in mind, and access to existing practice?
I think the other areas that have been highlighted were kind of muscle disorder. These were the kind of areas where we were kind of looking to start with. In terms of neurological conditions, obviously there's many conditions. So no, we've not looked at lots of different conditions, but these were the ones that have been highlighted so far. We're starting to see the movement disorder side of things, and certainly muscle disorder has been looked at as well as highlighted as kind of the next place to go. Again, just because they're very under-resourced in terms of consultant management, and using kind of an APP role just frees up that consultant time to deal with perhaps more complex patients that would need an APP to be able to review people on a more regular basis.
Right, thanks.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions in the box, and there is some slightly good news there that if we move into our facilitated discussion section now, then we won't lose any time. So Alice, are you ready to work your meeting room magic? That's excellent. So we've got three facilitators leading three groups. So my colleagues Richard Brewster and Anissa Tomberg from Scottish Government, and Ian McWhirter, who we just heard from MS Revive, will be your facilitators this morning. But Alice, if you'd like to put people into their rooms, we'll see you back at 10 to 1.
Well done.
Yes, they've gone.
Bit of a lag there, wasn't it?
There was a real lag, especially with certain people.
Yeah. Right. Could you tell Tanith there's only 2 rooms, just because then when they come back, she'll only need to summarise from 2, and I will
Do you
jump
think I
in.
should just message her? Do you think if I message her, that's the best way, or email? I'll do both.
Yeah. And I will go into a room.
Yeah, okay. I think number 1 has lost the most people, if you want to go there.
Brilliant.
Cool.
I will join that. Thank you.
Bye.
Welcome back, everybody. I don't know when I get a sense that everybody has returned to the meeting. Alice, Lorna, can you give me a thumbs up? Right, we think everybody's back. Thank you so much for sticking with us to this point, and also for the fact that we are now back on schedule, which is absolutely brilliant. Because some people had to leave early, we've got two groups to feed back in this session. So Anissa and Ian will be feeding back from your groups. I wonder if I can start with Ian.
Sure, yeah, just a few kind of key themes that came out of the conversation that we were having. I think the main one was we've all got a shared goal in improving the outcomes for people with neurological conditions. That's why we're here. We're all kind of on board anyway. So how do we get these messages out to that wider community? How do we get these messages out much more widely than that kind of group that we are that's got that vested interest at the moment? That was a really kind of key question about really how we share that knowledge. Other themes that came out about ensuring the information and support that's been highlighted this morning, some of the excellent projects, are really made available to people at the right time and as early on as possible. Point made by one of our colleagues relating to ME about making sure that information is available at the time of diagnosis. A lot, again, more about publicity and campaigning, getting the projects and outcomes sold to people to really kind of facilitate that knowledge sharing. How we can improve current practices, both patients and clinicians, through all the aspects of learning that are being developed. And a really key thing about patient involvement, a real theme that's come through from this morning, is the patient involvement lived experience, highlighted a few times in the group about the patient-initiated review and how valuable that actually is. So, yeah, final point, I suppose, was about really, in terms of getting that message out there, how we could potentially look to link to specific existing forums and establish infrastructures like TURAS to really kind of disseminate all the incredibly good outcomes that have been discussed this morning, how we could really use that. So yeah, that was a brief summary of what we were talking about in the group there.
That's great. Thank you for being brief, Ian, and that sounds really comprehensive. Anissa, what did you find from our group?
So there were some excellent points that came through. Mary had highlighted some work that's going on around focused ultrasound at the moment and essential tremor, which is helpful to hear. There are points around patient feedback or feedback from people with neurological conditions, and how good it was to see that reflected in some of the presentations, and that you could see where having incorporated that feedback into the work was in itself one of the things that had made projects successful. And how helpful that was. There was some conversation about sort of forward strategy in terms of funding, where we can see many projects have got potential to be embedded and to be sort of further rolled out, and there are questions around continuing to support things that have already been supported versus looking more widely at kind of just more sort of pump priming. And there were some reflections about how the committee is thinking around that at the moment and looking at this. There are points raised about the challenge of balancing learning with ongoing service need, for challenges for healthcare professionals, balancing kind of ongoing learning with ongoing service needs, and that sometimes the learning in itself can present challenges because you have to sort of then look to how to sustain and how to spread this, and where the resource comes to do that as well. So it's that kind of ongoing balancing act. And there are a couple of important points raised about the issue of there having been quite an unmet need for people with neurological conditions, under-recognised, unmet for quite some period of time already, and that we're kind of starting from that position, and that in itself can make it a bit more difficult in terms of building sustainability, and is against the backdrop of having quite a limited workforce for people with very, very specific needs as well. Yes, and a very interesting point about potentially neuroimmunologists coming into play because of the kind of proliferation of long COVID and ME/CFS and things like that. So there's loads of food for thought.
Thank you, Anissa. I'm just checking the chat, and it turns out it was a message that I had missed earlier from a colleague. So thank you for your participation today. It's been just really interesting to hear about some of the breadth of work that's going on, but also some of the commonality that's kind of coming through in terms of the learnings that people are having. That I think gives us all confidence that you know, we are learning things that can be applied in other health boards and other conditions, in other areas of work. The real challenge for us is going to be how we can get that to happen. It's great to have the commitment of people actually, in the series of meetings we've had about these practice sharing events, I think have really helped us to develop a bit of a sense of a shared community trying to deliver these projects and this important work. So I'm hoping that one of the legacies of the funding can be maintaining that kind of sense of people of interest coming together and sharing different perspectives, different views and different learning. Before we go, which we're going to go in 3 minutes, if you look at the top of your screen, you'll see a series of icons. One of them is an S